At 70, I stopped explaining myself and something unexpected happened. The arguments became shorter, the guilt became lighter, the nights became quieter. My life did not suddenly become perfect. Some people still misunderstood me. Some still judged my choices. A few even called me distant, stubborn, or selfish. But for the first time in many years, their opinions did not follow me into every room of my house. I had spent most of my life explaining. I explained why I was tired. I explained why I could not lend more money. I explained why I wanted to stay home. I explained why certain words had hurt me. I explained why I needed respect from my own family. I believed that if I spoke clearly enough, calmly enough, and kindly enough, people would finally understand my heart. But many people were not listening to understand me. They were listening for a weakness in my answer, a reason to argue, or a way to make my decision more convenient for them. I did not understand this until I was much older. There is a kind of exhaustion that does not come from work. It comes from constantly defending your right to live in peace. Older people know this exhaustion well. By the time you reach 60 or 70, you have already carried many responsibilities. You have raised children, supported relatives, worked through illness and disappointment, buried people you loved, and survived days no one else fully understood. Yet even after all that, someone may still expect you to justify how you spend your time, your savings, your energy, and the years you have left. They may question why you no longer attend every gathering. They may ask why you do not answer every phone call. They may criticize the way you manage your home, your friendships, or your daily routine. And because you love them, you explain. You explain until your simple decision becomes a public discussion. You explain until your boundary becomes a negotiation. You explain until you begin doubting a choice that felt right before everyone gave an opinion. At 70, I finally saw what this was doing to me. I was not living my life. I was presenting a case for it. That realization changed everything. The first lesson I learned was that people who respect you do not require endless explanations. A respectful person may ask a question. They may not agree with your choice. They may even feel disappointed. But they will not punish you for having a life of your own. I once had a family member who expected me to be available whenever they called. It did not matter whether I had plans, whether I was resting, or whether I simply wanted a quiet afternoon. If I said I could not help, the questions began. What are you doing? Why can't you change your plans? It will only take a little while. What could be more important than family? That last question always found the soft place in me. Like many people from my generation, I was raised to believe that family must come first, no matter the cost. I thought saying no meant I was unkind. I thought protecting my time meant I was becoming cold. So I gave long explanations. I described my schedule. I mentioned how tired I felt. I tried to prove that my reason was serious enough. But every reason I gave became something for the other person to challenge. If I said I was tired, they said I could rest later. If I said I had an appointment, they asked whether I could move it. If I said I needed a day to myself, they acted as though I had insulted them. This is where many of us make the mistake. We believe that a better explanation will create more respect. Often, it creates more debate. One day, I said, "I am not available today." They asked why. I said, "Because I am not available." My hands were trembling when I said it. I felt guilty for the rest of the afternoon, but something inside me had changed. I realized that I did not need a dramatic reason to protect my own time. I did not need to be sick, busy, or exhausted enough to deserve a peaceful day. A person who respects you may not like your answer, but they will learn to accept it. A person who benefits from your lack of boundaries will demand an explanation. If you remember nothing else, remember this: respect does not need a long speech. The second lesson was that over-explaining often comes from fear, not kindness. For years, I told myself I explained because I wanted to avoid hurting people. That was partly true, but beneath it was another truth I did not want to face. I was afraid of being disliked. I was afraid someone would call me selfish. I was afraid my children would pull away, that relatives would speak badly about me, or that friends would stop inviting me. So I kept everyone comfortable, even when it made me uncomfortable. Fear can wear the clothes of kindness. It can make self-abandonment look like generosity. I remember agreeing to host a family gathering when I was already exhausted. My back was hurting, my sleep had been poor, and I had no desire to spend 2 days cooking and cleaning. But I said yes. Then I complained quietly while preparing everything. I felt resentful when no one offered enough help. I felt invisible when people left without noticing how tired I was. But the truth was painful. They had asked, and I had agreed. I had hoped they would somehow hear the no hidden inside my yes. People cannot respect a boundary you are too afraid to speak. After that gathering, I began practicing simple honesty. I cannot host this time. I need more notice. I am not comfortable with that. I have decided differently. At first, each sentence felt harsh. That is what happens when you have spent a lifetime softening every truth. Even a calm boundary can feel cruel when you are not used to having one. But the discomfort passed. The peace remained. I learned that disappointing someone is not the same as harming them. People are allowed to feel disappointed by your decision. Their disappointment does not mean your decision was wrong. The older I became, the more clearly I saw that fear had made me explain too much, give too much, and tolerate too much. Peace began when I stopped confusing approval with love. The third lesson was that not every misunderstanding needs to be corrected. This was difficult for me because I always wanted my intentions to be known. If someone thought I was rude, I wanted to explain that I was tired. If someone thought I was distant, I wanted to explain what I had been going through. If someone criticized a choice I made years ago, I wanted to give them every detail they had never seen. I believed that once people knew the full story, they would judge me more gently. Sometimes they did. Often they did not. Some people prefer the version of you that supports the story they have already chosen. They may need you to be the difficult parent, the selfish sibling, the unreasonable neighbor, or the stubborn old person. Your explanation threatens that story, so they refuse to hear it. I spent years trying to correct people who were committed to misunderstanding me. It was like knocking on a locked door and blaming myself because no one opened it. One of the most freeing moments of my later life came when I realized that another person's opinion was not an emergency. Someone can think I am wrong. Someone can repeat an incomplete story. Someone can dislike my boundary. I can survive that. This does not mean truth does not matter. When a relationship is loving and honest, clarification can heal. A calm conversation can prevent a small misunderstanding from becoming a deep wound. But you must notice whether the other person is curious or merely accusing. A curious person asks, "Can you help me understand?" An accusing person says, "I already know why you did it." One opens a door, the other builds a wall. I no longer explain my heart to people who have already sentenced me. Sometimes dignity means allowing someone to be wrong about you. That can feel painful, especially when the person is close to you. Pride wants to chase them, correct them, and prove your goodness. But peace asks a different question. How much of my life am I willing to spend managing someone else's opinion? At 70, my answer became very clear. Not much. The fourth lesson was painful because it involved family. I learned that guilt is often used against the people who care the most. The responsible child becomes the one everyone calls. The generous parent becomes the one everyone borrows from. The patient grandparent becomes the one expected to forgive every disrespect. People often place the greatest burden on the person least likely to complain. I was that person for many years. Whenever I tried to step back, someone reminded me of my role. You have always helped us. You are the one we can depend on. You know how difficult things are for me. Those words sounded like love, but sometimes they were pressure. I would begin explaining why I could not give more time, more money, or more emotional energy. Then the old guilt would rise. I would remember mistakes I had made as a parent. I would remember times I had been too busy, too strict, or too distracted. I would tell myself that perhaps I owed them. Guilt made me believe I had to keep paying for the past. But the hardest lesson came later. An apology is not a lifelong contract to accept poor treatment. You can regret your mistakes without handing another person permanent control over you. You can say, "I was wrong." You can listen to someone's pain. You can repair what is still possible. But you do not have to allow every disagreement to become a trial of your entire life. There were conversations where a present boundary was answered with an old accusation. I would say, "I cannot lend money this month." The reply would be, "You were never there when I needed you." I would say, "Please do not speak to me that way." The reply would be, "You hurt me years ago." For a long time, I let these conversations pull me backward. I tried to defend every year, every choice, and every mistake. Now I say, I am willing to talk about the past respectfully, but it does not change my decision today. Then I stop. That sentence gave me back a part of myself. Regret should make us wiser. It should not make us obedient to manipulation. You are allowed to learn from the past without living on your knees before it. The fifth lesson was that privacy protects peace. I used to tell people too much. I shared plans before they were settled. I shared worries before I understood them. I shared financial choices, family problems, and private disappointments because I wanted advice or reassurance. But the more people knew, the more opinions entered my life. If I mentioned spending money on something I enjoyed, someone told me it was wasteful. If I said I wanted to travel, someone warned me against it. If I considered moving, changing my routine, or stepping away from a responsibility, everyone had something to say. Soon, I was no longer listening to my own judgment. I was carrying a room full of voices in my mind. Privacy is not bitterness. It is wisdom. Not every plan needs an announcement. Not every family problem needs an audience. Not every decision needs a committee. Some things grow better in quiet. I began waiting before sharing important choices. I allowed myself time to think without interruption. I asked only one or two trustworthy people when I truly needed advice. The difference was remarkable. My decisions became calmer because they were not crowded by other people's fears. This is especially important in old age. When others see you aging, they may begin to speak to you as if you can no longer judge what is right for your own life. They may question your spending, your friendships, your home, or your independence. Sometimes their concern is sincere and useful. We should not reject good advice simply to prove that we are strong, but concern must not become control. You still have a right to privacy. You still have a right to make reasonable choices without explaining every detail. You still have a right to keep parts of your life for yourself. The older I get, the more carefully I choose who receives my personal information. A private life is not a secret life. It is a protected life. The sixth lesson was that silence can be more honest than a long explanation. I used to think silence meant weakness. If someone accused me, I answered. If someone interrupted me, I spoke louder. If someone twisted my words, I tried to untangle them. I wanted the final word because I thought the final word meant victory. But many arguments do not end because someone finally explains perfectly. They end because one person becomes too tired to continue. I began noticing what arguments did to me. My heart would race. My hands would shake. I would replay the conversation all night. Sometimes I would spend 3 days disturbed by 10 minutes of conflict. Peace becomes more valuable when your energy becomes limited. I could no longer afford to give several days of my life to every rude remark. So I learned to pause. When someone said something sharp, I stopped answering immediately. When a conversation became disrespectful, I said, "We can talk again when we are both calmer." When someone kept pushing after I had answered, I allowed silence to remain. At first, silence felt empty. Then it began to feel strong. Silence gave me time to decide whether my words would improve the situation or merely feed it. It kept me from saying cruel things that could not be taken back. It showed me which people wanted resolution and which people only wanted reaction. A person seeking understanding will usually return more calmly. A person seeking control becomes angry when you stop participating. That anger tells you something. Silence is not always the answer. There are moments when we must speak clearly, especially when someone is being harmed, when a boundary is crossed, or when truth has been hidden too long. But silence has power when words are being wasted. You do not have to respond to every insult. You do not have to correct every unfair comment. You do not have to remain in a conversation that has lost respect. Sometimes the strongest reply is, "I have nothing more to add." The seventh lesson was that explaining yourself can become a way of asking permission. This truth surprised me. I had always thought I was informing people. In reality, I was often waiting for approval. I would say, "I am thinking about doing this because..." Then I would watch the other person's face. If they approved, I felt relieved. If they frowned, I began changing my mind. I had lived long enough to raise a family, survive losses, make difficult choices, and carry serious responsibilities. Yet I still acted as though I needed permission to spend a quiet weekend alone. That was not humility. It was a loss of trust in myself. As we age, others may begin treating our decisions as questionable simply because we are older. They may say, "Are you sure? Do you really need that? Wouldn't it be better if you did what we think?" Sometimes these questions are loving. Sometimes they are necessary. Age does not make any of us incapable of error, but there is a difference between receiving advice and surrendering authority over your own life. I began answering differently. Instead of saying, "I am thinking about staying home because I have been tired, and the drive is long, and I hope you understand," I said, "I have decided to stay home." Instead of saying, "I hope no one is upset, but I may need to stop helping every week," I said, "From now on, I will not be available every week." These sentences were shorter, but they felt more truthful. A decision sounds different from a request for permission. That change brought peace because I stopped inviting people to vote on matters that belonged to me. You can listen to advice without giving away the final decision. You can love people without placing them in charge of your conscience. The final lesson was the deepest one. I learned that inner peace begins when you accept that you will disappoint people. There is no peaceful life in which everyone approves of you. Someone will think you should visit more. Someone will think you should give more. Someone will think you should forgive faster, speak less, speak more, spend differently, live differently, or age differently. You cannot satisfy all of them. For much of my life, I tried. I adjusted myself until I no longer knew what I wanted. I smiled when I was hurt. I agreed when I was tired. I explained when I wanted to be left alone. And still, someone was disappointed. That was when I understood the foolishness of it. I had sacrificed my peace without gaining universal approval, so I made a different choice. I decided to live in a way I could respect, not perfectly, not selfishly, not without listening to people I love, but honestly. I stopped explaining ordinary choices. I stopped defending every boundary. I stopped giving private information to people who treated it as public property. I stopped trying to convince people who had already decided who I was. The result was not dramatic. There was no grand announcement. My life simply became quieter. I began sleeping better after difficult conversations because I no longer replayed every sentence. I felt less resentment because my yes became honest and my no became clear. Some relationships improved because people learned where I stood. Others became distant because they had depended on my fear of disappointing them. That loss hurt. Peace is not always painless. Sometimes peace costs you the closeness of people who were comfortable only when you had no boundaries. But a quiet life is not an empty life. The space left behind can be filled with rest, dignity, and relationships that do not require you to betray yourself. At 70, I no longer need everyone to understand me. I want to be fair. I want to be kind. I want to listen when someone speaks honestly. But I no longer believe kindness requires endless self-defense. I know what I have survived. I know the mistakes I regret. I know the love I tried to give, even when I gave it imperfectly. I know the reasons behind the life I have chosen. Not everyone needs access to those reasons. Some explanations belong in a loving conversation. Some belong only in prayer, reflection, or the privacy of your own heart. And some are no longer necessary. If you are tired of explaining yourself, begin gently. Do not become cruel. Do not use silence to punish people. Do not refuse every question simply because you fear disagreement. Instead, notice the difference between a sincere question and a demand for control. Give one clear answer. Speak respectfully. Then allow your answer to stand. You do not need 10 reasons. You do not need a perfect speech. You do not need to prove that your need for peace is serious enough. Sometimes a calm no is enough. Sometimes I have decided is enough. Sometimes walking away without proving your pain is enough. Old age teaches you quietly. It teaches you that time is too precious to spend defending every choice. It teaches you that energy given to pointless arguments is energy taken from the life still waiting for you. It teaches you that self-respect often sounds simple. No, not today. That does not work for me. I will think about it. I have nothing more to say. At 70, I stopped explaining myself, and my life became peaceful. Not because everyone finally understood me, but because I finally understood that they did not have to. If you have learned this lesson in your own life, share your age in the comments. Tell me when you stopped explaining yourself, or whether you are still learning how.